Hey there guys, I'm back to another video. Today we are 2 days away from Marvel's Spider-Man's 2-year anniversary since it dropped on the PlayStation 4 in 2018. The title has been majorly successful, selling over 13 million units worldwide, along with a follow-up game coming later this year, with Miles Morales taking the lead. This retrospective video is meant to take a second look at the game, story, gameplay, and all, along with the City That Never Sleeps DLC. I'll be spoiling the main game and the DLC story since I want this video to be my last talking about Marvel Spider-Man on the PS4. So, without further ado, let's dive into Insomniac Spider-Man once again. The story for Marvel Spider-Man is about a much older and veteran Peter Parker. He's been Spider-Man for roughly 8 years now and has faced many of his iconic villains. The one that's been giving him the most trouble over the years, Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, is finally getting arrested, and that's how the game opens up. Fisk's last words before heading off to prison is about how he kept the city in order, saying in 1 week you'll be wishing you had him back. That's the entire setup for the game's story, and he was right. Multiple factions and groups rise up, causing New York City to become a war zone. This Peter Parker being a much older representation of the character is actually not that bad. They're still able to implement ways for Peter's life and Spider-Man's life to intertwine with one another. Spider-Man saves the city while being late to help Dr. Octavius or straight up losing his apartment. Elements of what make a great Spider-Man story are here. Constantly juggling his double lifestyle keeps the story interesting, like most Spidey stories should. His allies and enemies are represented just as good as Peter is. Aunt May is a prominent figure at the Feast Homeless Shelter. Mary Jane is an investigative journalist for the Daily Bugle. Yuri Watanabe, the captain of the NYPD, has a close relationship with Spider-Man, and they work together to keep the city safe. All these characters, I was pretty fine with how they acted in relation to Peter. The way Miles Morales was introduced for this game was done really well. Having us work with his father, Jefferson Davis, before his unfortunate death made Miles' character stand out more. Miles is a major fan of the web swinger. Peter reaches out to Miles to help at the Feast Shelter because Peter knows Miles on a more personal level due to his duo lifestyle. Working with his father and knowing the pain and struggle he's going through after his loss, their friendship starts before Miles even realizes. Miles gaining spider powers by the game's conclusion had me very excited to see what was to come next, because usually Miles the Spider-Man exists without Peter being in the picture, but it looks like they're going to coexist in Insomniac's Spider-Man. Mr. Negative was the main villain shown before the game's released. His backstory connects to Norman and Otto, more on that later, and seeks revenge on Norman because of his wrongdoings. Mr. Negative's other self, Martin Lee, connects to the Feast Shelter, and he played a major role on that place before handling his business with Norman. I thought Mr. Negative was a fine villain. As an Asian American, I love seeing more representation in entertainment, and I was eager to see his full story in this game. His motives were clear once we learned of his past, but he obviously wasn't the main bad guy. Dr. Octavius was the main bad guy, however, and he's done extremely well. Otto has been a mentor to Peter since he was a college professor and is now working with him to create advanced prosthetic limb technology. We're thrown into Peter and Otto's relationship at almost the perfect time. We get to see the respect Peter has for Otto before he eventually gives in to his own revenge plot on Norman. You get to see the downfall of Otto, from Peter's friend and mentor to the crazed scientist seeking revenge. Norman Osborn is running for mayor, and he's the same selfish scumbag we know in previous incarnations of the character. It's just this time he's more of a political figure because of the whole mayor thing. Norman and Otto used to work together until the accident with Martin Lee. Because of an unforeseen result, Lee lost both of his parents along with becoming Mr. Negative. After this event, Norman and Otto's relationship was forever tainted. Norman's spite for Otto shows when he kicks him out of his own lab because it's deemed unsafe. Norman could have turned a blind eye for his former friend, but he decided to act on the safety hazard and even went into the lab personally, definitely taking up his role as a politician seriously. The other members of the Sinister Six are side villains, which I'm totally fine with. You'll be interacting with them throughout the game in small bursts. I'm okay with the other members being side villains because Otto and Mr. Negative are actually fleshed out to a decent extent and are the main driving force for getting the Devil's Breath project off the ground. Otto being the sixth member of the Sinister Six was obvious to any Spidey fan, and I argued made the story predictable. Yeah, the story is predictable because I'm a massive Spider-Man fan, but does this make the story bad? No, not by any means. I finished Spider-Man PlayStation 4 initially, coming hot off of Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man comic run. I've wanted to read the series for quite some time, and I finally got around to finishing it in August 2018. Because I was satisfied with how that book turned out, over 200 issues in total, my expectations for this game's story were a little too high. I originally stated the story being this predictable as a Spidey fan was a bad thing, but I'm going to retract that statement and say the story is good, even with its predictability. The way they build up Otto into the big bad guy he is by the end, and the ending itself featuring the death of Aunt May, Miles revealing his powers to Peter, and Harry being sick with the symbiote was amazing. Aunt May's death was the one surprise I didn't see coming, and I was really torn seeing her go. I've replayed the game twice in the past couple of months, and that scene still has an emotional impact. Peter having to sacrifice his aunt to save the lives of New York was the ultimate choice when it comes to being Spider-Man. I've already talked about Miles earlier, but Harry being sick with the symbiote, that was really cool and another great surprise for the game's ending. We're not sure what the exact origins for the symbiote are, but I'm sure we'll learn in due time. The gameplay is still the same fun action I've come to love in 2018, attacking enemies head-on with different combos and gadgets. Stealth sections aren't the best, but I still enjoy them whenever the opportunity comes. Exploring the world that is New York City is once again a joy to swing through. Fast travel doesn't ever feel necessary since swinging around is always fun. In the world of New York City, there are a bunch of side activities to do, like side missions, random crimes, enemy bases, and a variety of collectibles to find and, well, collect. Side missions are a nice way to break up the pace of the main game, nothing too crazy, and don't really contribute to the main story. Random crimes also break up the pace of the game a bit too. I have an insane OCD for this game because I always feel obligated to do the random crimes whenever they appear, no matter how far away they may be. Enemy bases are buildings controlled by a certain faction, and you have to defeat all the enemies to reclaim the territory. They come at you in waves, and there are bonus activities like hitting a 50-hit combo and things like that, which makes the enemy bases slightly more enjoyable than they already are. The collectibles range from Peter's backpacks to photo landmarks of the city. The backpacks are often little Easter eggs and collectibles, sort of giving more context to this Spider-Man over the past 8-ish years of his career. The photo landmarks also have Easter egg elements to them as well, some landmarks like the Avengers Tower and the Nelson and Murdoch office. At the end of the day, collectibles are here to give the player a chance to extend their playtime as a sort of extended side mission throughout your playthrough. They added New Game Plus as a free update a few months after release, and it's probably the best way to replay the game, even on ultimate difficulty. If you 100%ed the game like I did, New Game Plus makes you feel so godlike with all the upgrades and gadgets unlocked. The MJ and Miles sections of the game I used to like since they quote-unquote broke up the pace of the game, but they're honestly so bad. They don't feel rewarding or satisfying to play through, just an obstacle in my way to get to the next part of the game. I would literally speed run through these sections because they're that bad. Outside of the MJ and Miles sections, my opinion on the gameplay is still the same. It's a fun as hell action-adventure open-world Spidey game. Similar to the gameplay, my opinion on the presentation and graphics are relatively the same as well. The game still looks great for a PlayStation 4 title with pretty good production value behind it. The actor who plays Spider-Man, Yuri Lowenthal, has really grown on me in the past 2 years, but Josh Keaton is still my personal favorite actor to take on the hero. My recent playthroughs of the game were met with more frame rate drops than previously. These drops weren't consistent, mind you, just happening randomly during my playthroughs. Overall, the presentation is still fairly solid. For the main game, my opinion on Marvel Spider-Man is more in a positive light. The story, all things considered, is a great Spider-Man story. The gameplay is still a blast to enjoy outside of the MJ and Miles sections. The presentation might be a little shaky at times, but still performs well on the console. The City That Never Sleeps DLC acts as a self-contained epilogue to the main game. We're not sure yet if Insomniac Games is going to use any of the story development here in this DLC for future games right now, so I'm going to consider this DLC as a self-contained epilogue. The overarching story for these 3 chapters is about the rising gang war between the Maggia families. Chapter 1 focuses on Black Cat and her involvement in this rising gang war. The main story this chapter focuses on is Peter and Black Cat's relationship. Their past isn't explicitly told to us, but hinted at in their current interactions. Black Cat potentially having a kid with Peter in order to trick him into helping her was really low. This whole thing about Peter could be a dad was so dumb and hilarious. Replaying it made me remember they actually made this a story bit, and I was like, oh yeah, they did this. I can't believe they did that. She also dies at the end of the chapter, which was a pretty good cliffhanger. This was a fairly good start to this new DLC, even with the whole Peter being a dad story bait. I really liked how they explored Peter and Black Cat's relationship while moving the main plot of the gang more along. Chapter 2 focuses on giving Yuri some actual character. After her run-in with Hammerhead, pretty much losing her entire squad of officers, Yuri goes on this psychotic revenge plot on him. Peter's role in this story is to make sure Yuri doesn't go on the deep end while following the rising gang war. Unfortunately, Yuri gives into her revenge desires and kills Hammerhead. Hammerhead is shortly revived afterwards, which sets up Chapter 3. Yuri going AWOL and doing this complete 180 was really interesting, especially since she's the captain of the NYPD. She's one of the supporting characters I'm not too familiar with since she's a newer comic book character. Speaking of the comics, she becomes this character named Wraith in the comics. If Insomniac Games plan on turning Yuri into Wraith, I wouldn't mind it. Be my guest. Whichever direction they decide to go in, Yuri's story in Chapter 2 is entertaining. The final chapter is focused on Silver Sable coming back to New York due to Hammerhead using her weapons. This is the Spidey Silver Sable team up that is as entertaining as you think it is. Her dry personality mixed in with Peter's wittiness makes scenes with them together really fun to watch. This chapter ends with Silver Sable and Spider-Man defeating Hammerhead, which concludes the Magia gang war. Afterwards, Silver Sable returns to Sakaria to help her people. Oh, and Black Cat actually didn't die and came back for a moment to save Peter. She doesn't help in taking down Hammerhead, but just shows up to let the player know that she did indeed fake her death. Exploring more of Silver Sable's character outside of Norman's henchmen was interesting. She always had good intentions, but ended up on the wrong side of the fight. The overall story for the City That Never Sleeps DLC is not that bad. The focus may be on the Magia gang war, but the actual focus is on the new side character you get to further explore in each chapter. Black Cat, Yuri, and Silver Sable get a little bit more character development thanks to this DLC epilogue. Other side characters make appearances too, like MJ and Miles, and the interactions you have with them are still neat to experience. The gameplay is still relatively the same. There are a couple of new gameplay additions depending on the chapter. The Spidey drone makes an appearance, which is alright. You use the drone to sneak around and collect intel, similar to the MJ/Miles sections, but not as tedious. There is one MJ section in Chapter 1, but that's the only time you revisit these gameplay sections in this DLC, thankfully. Screwball challenges appear throughout all DLC chapters. I personally hate Screwball as a character with her quirky internet persona, but the challenges are actually not that bad. Some of them are really creative and can be fun at times, but they could also be super frustrating when you're going for the highest score. The challenges at the end of the day are a hit or miss. The side missions actually give us more story details. Chapter 1 side missions explore the original Black Cat stolen paintings, and Chapter 3 side missions explore how far Yuri has actually gone rogue. All of the gameplay additions for this DLC are kind of what I expected, still similar to the main game, but adding some new mission types like the Spider Drone and Screwball challenges to make it different from the main game. In short, the City That Never Sleeps DLC is not that bad. If you're itching for more Spider-Man PlayStation 4 action, you've probably already purchased this DLC and know how much of an epilogue this DLC feels. Each chapter fleshing out a different side character was really cool and made each chapter feel different in that regard. This could also be a bad thing depending on how you look at it, since it's supposed to be one coherent story, but feels more like 3 different stories mixed in together. The gameplay being more or less the same is fine by me. The new additions like the Screwball challenges and the Spider Drone I'm fine with. Screwball can definitely be a pain at times, but I have some of the most creative challenges by far. Each chapter being $10 each, or $25 altogether, you'll be getting an epilogue to the main game that's about 4 to 6 hours long that includes extra development to some major side characters. In conclusion, my love for this game has not faded away. If anything, my opinion on the game is in a more positive light. The story is well crafted, placing elements of previous Spidey stories in here while creating their own incarnation of the character. The gameplay is still fun as hell with its combat and web swinging. Presentation meets all my expectations for the current gen hardware. The DLC is a nice 4 to 6 hour addition to the main game's already 15 to 16 hour adventure. Marvel's Spider-Man is still a great PlayStation 4 exclusive 2 years after its release, and I cannot wait to see what happens next in Insomniac's world of Spider-Man. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you guys haven't already, you can subscribe. I put new videos up on Saturdays. You can follow me on social media, Facebook and Twitter. I put updates on my future videos. Check out my podcast, the Travis and Damien Podcast, over at anchor.fm/Travis Damien Podcast. We talk about games, movies, anime every other week. And check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/TVSonic Gaming. I try to stream there at least once a week. But yeah, that's all I have for today. Thank you guys for watching this video once again. See you guys next time with more videos. Game on, gamers.